Hello and welcome to Garden Chatter, where we connect gardeners, authors, bloggers, so we can all connect and grow and learn. I'm really excited. Today we have Amy Stewart on. She is a longtime garden writer and author of a number of books. So we get to meet her. We'll talk about some of her earlier books and also her most recent novel, Girl Waits with Gun. So I'm excited to hear about that. Let's check in with my co-host, Bren Haas. She's over in Ohio and scrambling I here to get set up. Our
See,
Clint, what's that?
go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, I was just wondering because you're getting a geodesic dome installed with Clint and Scott.
Yes, and they are full of energy. In fact, they're still out in the barn. It's dark here in Ohio because, it's 8 o'clock and our sun, we're a little different than you guys out there on the West Coast. And they're out there still cutting away in the barn with the generator going and the lights going. They just don't stop, which is cool, right? So, yeah.
You're going and going.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump over and meet Amy. Amy, it looks like you're in a really cool, like, an attic studio. Is that right? Kind of.
I am. Yeah, this is my office. So this is where I work. And the room actually isn't crooked. I think the camera's a little crooked. But anyway, my house is a little crooked. It's an old Victorian house, and nothing in this house is level or even with anything else. But yeah, this is where I work. So this is where you find me pretty much every day when I'm not on the road.
Yeah, and you're located in Northern California in
Yes.
Eureka, right?
Eureka, California. Yeah, so I'm on the coast almost all the way to Oregon, redwood country.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. That's right. What hardiness zone is that?
I don't know. We don't really do hardiness zones out here. We do the sunset zones. So I
Oh,
think I'm
okay.
sunset zone 17 or 15, depending on who you ask.
Okay.
I think hardiness zone would be 8 or 9, probably.
Wow.
Yeah, probably 9 because we're like 8 where I am, and it's a little
Yeah.
colder. So
The problem with those zones out here is that, because like I don't get any heat. It never gets warm in the summer. So it's like, it's sort of not so helpful, but yeah.
yeah, you almost need the heat index built
That's
in
right.
too because
Yes.
it's not so much how cold it gets; it's partly how warm does it get.
That's right. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
well, Amy, why don't you tell a little bit about, so how long have you been in Eureka, and maybe tell a little bit about your writing leading up to where you just wrote a novel. So what are some of the things you've worked on over the years?
Yeah, well, you know what? They're right here. I should get them.
You got them?
I'll do some show and tell. So, my first book was From the Ground Up, which was a book about it was a memoir about my first garden in Santa Cruz, California. So I was about 25 maybe when I started even thinking about this, and not much going on in my life except this new garden, so that's what I wrote about. And that book came out in 2001, so almost 15 years ago. It's kind of hard to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. How does the time go? And then, hang on, I dropped them. Wait for it, wait for it. And then I moved up here to Eureka, and I wrote a book about earthworms. This is what the original hardcover looked like. It's called The Earth Moved on the Remarkable Achievements of Earthworms. And it's kind of a natural history of earthworms. Charles Darwin wrote a really interesting book about worms over 100 years ago and did some really original earthworm science, like studied things about earthworms that nobody else had ever done. So he's in some ways kind of like the original earthworm scientist. And I read his book and I thought it was fascinating, and I got to wondering what else had happened with earthworm science since he wrote his book. So I went around and interviewed them all. Hang on, if you wait. If you look for it today, it looks like this in paperback. So anyway, that's that book.
Nice.
And that came out in 2004.
Now, Amy, Is it true that a lot of the like most of the earthworms we have now are not actually native earthworms?
Yes, and you know that's one of the things I was really interested in is that the earthworms that I was seeing in my backyard in Santa Cruz were different. They were like clearly a different species from the earthworms that were in my garden up here in Eureka. So it got me wondering, like, you know, how many different species of earthworms are there, and what do we know about them, and what don't we know about them? And I was in touch with an earthworm scientist named Sam James, who's in the book, and I dug up different species of earthworms, not just from my own backyard, but from other places around town, including in the redwood forest. And I sent those to him to be identified. I just put them in a Tupperware thing and mailed them. And sure enough, they were all European species. So we Europeans brought those with us when we came, you know, to this country.
It just seems kind of interesting that they displace the native ones so much. I mean, like why?
Well, you know, probably this is something that's still kind of being debated, but probably they didn't out and out displace them. You know, displacement tends to mean out-competing another species for food and habitat. And that's probably not what happened. What is more likely is that we humans disrupted the habitat of native species of earthworms, maybe such that they couldn't live there anymore. And we brought in these European species in the roots of potted plants or ship's ballast or some of the different ways that we've moved earth and earthworms around. But probably it's not like they elbowed them out of the way or anything like that. And there's also a lot of places in the United States where there were no, not a lot, but there are some places in the United States where there were no native earthworm species at all, including northern parts of the country like in Minnesota, where the last ice age killed off any earthworm species that might have been there, and they never came back. So there are forests in Minnesota that have evolved without any native earthworms. And then European earthworms come in and change the soil composition and then change what plants can grow there and set off this whole other, you know, chain reaction. So, yeah, it's an interesting, you know, it's an interesting issue and an interesting question. It's definitely the case that earthworms do a lot of good and in our gardens and in agriculture, and they do good in the ecosystem in general. And the non-native species aren't pure evil, but they do have the ability to change the soil type, which drives everything else. So, you know, earthworm scientists talk about earthworms as ecosystem engineers because they drive everything else that happens.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So I was just, I'm just curious. So you wrote your book. We don't have to say how long ago it was. But have you always been a gardener or interested in growing things?
No, I've always been a writer. I've always wanted to write books. And so my first book, the memoir I wrote about my garden in Santa Cruz, was really just like, that's what was happening in my life at the time, so that's what I wrote about. And then every book kind of led to the next after that. So one always grew out of another. So I didn't really set out to write about, I was a writer first, you know, and writing about the natural world came second. But, you know, for me, all of these books have been as much about people as they've been about plants. I mean, I obviously didn't write a whole book just about earthworms. I wrote a book about earthworm scientists, right, and people who do work that puts them in contact with earthworm science, like people who work in recycling and are figuring out ways that earthworms can, you know, digest and compost huge portions of our waste stream. Like about half of everything we throw away can be fed to earthworms and turned into basically fertilizer. So, you know, really what I was doing was not so much writing about the worms, but writing about all these people. And that's always been what's interested me the most.
Absolutely. It sounds like, yeah, going all the way back to Darwin. So Very
Right.
cool.
Darwin too was a really interesting guy and an interesting, character for this book. So yeah, that was fun.
And then next was it the Flower Confidential?
Yes. So next was this book, Flower Confidential, which is a book about the global flower industry. So I moved up here to Eureka, California, and I went to visit a flower farm one day that was having an open house. And the flower farm was Sun Valley Floral Farm. It turns out to be the largest grower of cut flowers in the United States. And they have several farms in California, but one of them is just up the street from where I live. And so I went kind of naively thinking that I was going to be visiting fields of like sunflowers and dahlias and, with a red barn in the middle and some buckets and scissors. I had this very romanticized idea of what a flower farm was going to be. And then I went and I realized that in a lot of ways it's a factory. It's very mechanized and it's very industrial. And I think, that's not what most of us think of when we think about flowers. So I thought it would be an interesting topic for a book, and I realized that if I wrote this book, I was going to have to go all over the world to see where flowers come from, because most of our flowers come from Latin America, of course, and a lot of the industry is still based in Holland. So I knew right away there would be great travel, so that was reason enough to write the book.
Yeah.
But, it was at an interesting time. I mean, the book came out in 2007, and people were really just starting to talk about eating locally. And the idea of buying locally grown flowers or organic flowers, that was very kind of new, and not a lot of people were talking about it. And since then, it's become a whole movement. I mean, I'm sure, you guys know Deborah Prenzing, whose, book Slow Flowers is really all about American-grown flowers, and she's really become kind of a leader of this American-grown flowers sort of advocacy group that's really supporting flower farmers in this country. So that's been a really interesting shift that, really has happened after the book came out. That wasn't even really anything people were talking about except for right inside the industry, before that.
So you kind of wrote that right at the cusp of some changes, so you got to see some of that develop. That's cool.
Right, yeah, it was all changing as I was working on the book. I mean, the book was kind of a moving target because things kept shifting around. Even as I was writing it, the story kept changing because that was just this period of really rapid kind of growth and transformation in the flower industry. But it was fun, and the travel was really fantastic.
Very good.
Yeah.
Let's see. Jumping on, I guess we had some Wicked.
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah,
somebody at one of the flower farms was growing some poisonous plants and wanted to show them to me, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. There are these plants that are that we don't talk about that much, that are very toxic or deadly or dangerous, and there's some famous people who've been killed by plants. But we don't really talk about the dark side of the plant world that much. So I thought that could be fun, but I didn't have fun, listen to me. But I didn't want to write like a field guide to poisonous plants, because that's already been done. I thought it would be more interesting to write about the people who had been killed or tried to kill somebody. So, so that's what this is. So this is Wicked Plants, which came out in 2009.
Wow.
Yeah.
I haven't read that one. Did you touch base at all on poison ivy? That stuff is evil.
It is evil, and it is in here, but it's nowhere near the most painful plant in the world.
Really?
Yeah, I think the world's most painful plant is actually the giant stinging tree in southern Australia, which is covered in these tiny hairs that look like peach fuzz. But each one is like a miniature hypodermic needle. It's filled with a minuscule amount of a very potent neurotoxin. And it's very easy to get it under your skin because the hairs are so small that they slide right in. and the pain is supposed to be excruciating, and the pain can last for up to a year.
Yikes.
Yes, and can be reactivated by heat or sunlight or cold.
Wow.
So any
By
of
anything,
those
right?
things, right? Yeah. It's really, really awful. So
Do you
Yeah,
know,
I thought,
like, how do they keep away from it? Like, does it just grow in the wild, or does it?
yeah, it grows in the wild, and it's actually really hard to keep away from because those trichomes, those little hairs, actually break off and float around in the breeze. So you can inhale them, you can get them in your eyes,
That's
get
bad.
them in your mouth without even touching one.
wow.
Okay, maybe
I
that
knew
beach
I knew
wasn't
about the
I.
Australian, spiders and things, but
I know. I think all the most terrifying creatures are in Australia. I don't know why that is.
I know it's
Yeah,
crazy. And I
yeah.
thought stinging nettle was kind of scary, but
No, that's
yeah,
like totally
tame.
tame.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, the interesting thing about wicked plants is that it was, we tend to think of plants as being, very benign, right? Like they're green, they grow out of the ground, they're all natural, and they therefore must be good for us because anything that's all natural is good for us. When in fact, plants don't want to get eaten. They really, really don't. Like if you were a plant, you would wake up in the morning and go, okay, priority number one, do not get eaten today. And you're rooted in the ground, so you can't run away and hide, and you can't fight. So the only thing you can do is inflict pain and suffering on anyone who tries to hurt you. So in that way, it's amazing that there's any plants we can eat at all, because really, how does it benefit the plant to get eaten by us? For the most part, it doesn't. So it was very easy to come up with a list of plants to put in this book. I had a very, very long list and then had to cut them down and be pretty selective. So when it came time to write this one, which is Wicked Bugs and sort of the companion volume, believe it or not, I actually had the opposite problem. So people are terrified of bugs, all bugs, indiscriminately, and yet almost none of them can hurt us. It was really hard to come up with an equivalent number of insects, spiders, etc., that you should be afraid of, because there are almost none. So I think it's interesting that we're terrified of bugs and very trusting of plants, and in some ways it should be just the opposite.
Did you have a favorite human story in the Wicked Plants? Whether it's I don't know, something that someone died of or anything like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I just straightened out my house. I feel so
Oh, look at that. I thought all the houses were, maybe a little crooked, sinking foundations or something.
I know they are. And
Yeah. Wait. Yeah. Earthquakes.
Yeah,
That's
right.
right.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. No, I had a lot of favorite stories. One of the. It's sad, but it's sad in kind of an Edward Gorey way of being sad. Is that in Wicked Plants there's a story about a guy in the mid-1800s. He was a tailor and he lived in Scotland, and his children made him a sandwich, and they thought they were making him like a parsley, maybe that they were putting parsley in it, and it was actually hemlock. And so he died from a sandwich that his children had made for him.
That is pretty rough.
It's just so gothic, right? I mean, it was just like that is just like the beginning of some Victorian Gothic novel right there. So yeah, no. So there were lots of interesting and very and sometimes very tragic, but sometimes kind of funny stories. So for instance, there's a plant called mala mujer, meaning like bad woman in Spanish, and it's just a stinging plant, and it can raise a rash. And it's known for having kind of a delayed reaction. So you don't get a rash right away, but you get one later. So there's a story in the book, true, well, they're all true, but anyway, true story, that this young woman was on a school trip through Mexico, and they were hiking. And a few days after she got back from the trip, she had this raised welt that she could feel on her back. Her back was hurting and itching and stinging and driving her crazy, and it was in the shape of a hand on her back. which is totally creepy, right? It sounds like the beginning of a horror movie. But it turns out that she was wearing like a tank top or something, and her boyfriend put his hand on her back, and he had gotten covered in this stuff. So she got this perfect rash in the shape of a handprint on her back.
Wow.
Weird, huh?
That is.
Yeah.
I love the colors, or the print that you have on those last two books. Did you think those up, or do you have an artist or something?
Yeah, I got to make suggestions. So, yeah, I love the green that they came up with here. But they found this artist, very talented artist, who did both of these. Yeah. The funny thing about this one is that this little creature originally had 2 sets of wings, so that it really could be nothing but a dragonfly. Like, anatomically speaking, that's pretty much what it had to be. And I was like, you don't have to be too literal with this cover, but let's not make it a dragonfly. Like, let's make it something that could vaguely be a mosquito, maybe. So I had them change it a little bit so it didn't look too much like I was putting one of the most wonderful bugs in the world and calling it Wicked. But yeah, no, I love the art and I love the covers that they did. I got very lucky with all of that. But then we come to the cocktails. So,
Yay!
Yay! I know. So this is Drunken Botanist, and this came out in, when did this come out? 2013. So it's been a couple years, I guess. I can't believe it's been that long. And so my idea was to look at all the plants that we turn into alcohol. Everything from barley that goes into beer to the agave that we make tequila from, and sugarcane that we use to make rum. But then also all the herbs and flowers and seeds and fruit that are used to flavor alcohol. So whether that's chartreuse, which has supposedly like 130 different herbs in it, or even something like plums to make plum brandy. So really the whole gamut, including the garnishes and the plants that get added once it comes out of the bottle and goes into the glass, like mint. Like, what is the best kind of mint for a mojito versus the best kind of mint for a mint julep, So even the things that you do at home or at a bar to make a drink, I included all of those as well. So as you can imagine, the research was very fun, and I got lots of offers to help. Like, nobody wanted to help me with wicked bugs, but everybody volunteered to help with Drunken Botanist.
Yeah, I would think that would be a popular one. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, I was thinking with the Flower Confidential, you picked that one well, and the Drunken Botanist, very good choices.
Yeah,
a lot of sampling and testing and experimenting.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So, and with Drunken Botanist, I planted a cocktail garden of my own. So, I would be outside right now, but believe it or not, it's actually raining out there a little bit. So I don't want to be sitting out there with my laptop. I know, yay. But I have a little cocktail garden off my kitchen porch, and it's just about all in containers. And it's maybe 30 or so different herbs and small fruits that you can use to make a drink. So like mojito mint, which is actually the it's the mint that they use in Cuba to make mojitos. And it was smuggled into Canada by a Canadian tourist several years ago who just pulled it out of her drink at the airport in Havana and stuck it in her pocket and flew home with it. And yeah, and she reached out to a nursery in Canada where she lives and says, I smuggled this mint out of Cuba. What should I do with it? Like, she's so not a gardener that she doesn't even know how to grow mint, right? And so they said, bring it to us right now. So she did, and they grew it out and released it into the nursery trade in North America. So we can now buy mojito mint, even though you can't normally get plants in Cuba. So anyway, I have a lot of cool plants. I have elderberries. I have black currants, which are used to make cassis, which is a wonderful thing to grow, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, where 2 of the 3 of us are. And a few other berries, and a little citrus, which doesn't do so well for me, but I try anyway. And just lots and lots of interesting herbs that are great in cocktails, but that maybe you don't often think about so much as culinary herbs, like scented geraniums, which are fantastic but have kind of limited use in food, but endless use in cocktails. So those are the smell of those. Yeah.
Does your book have a suggested list of plants if one wanted to grow a cocktail garden?
Yes. Yeah. The third, basically part 3 of the book is a little different from the rest of the book in that it doesn't tell us, it gets much more how-to and prescriptive. So I have these charts like that talk about, what flowers you can grow for a cocktail garden. And then there's a similar chart like that for like fruit trees, like what are the specific kinds of fruit trees that make sense for the cocktails that you want to make. So it's not just like plant a cherry tree. It's like, well, which variety of cherry is used to make cherry garnishes for Manhattans or cherry brandy, so I really get into that in particular detail there.
Very good. Now, did you consider yourself to be more of a nonfiction writer way back when you started writing, or did you always aspire to write a novel? I was just curious.
Yeah, I read a lot of fiction, so I always had an idea that I would write fiction, and then I sort of just kept not doing it. I mean, there are some failed novels in drawers, so definitely in between some of these other books, there were attempts at novels that did not make it. So I definitely always had that idea, but the novel that just came out, which I guess I can show you, is so this is the new book, Girl Waits with Gun.
That's a big book. How many pages?
It is a big book. I know. How many pages?
It was 440 or something.
You timed it just right, because most of us are heading into winter, and that's a great book you could just cuddle up by the fireplace and read, right?
Yeah, it's 400 pages. It's 100,000 words, which I didn't think of as long for a novel, but I actually think a lot of people write novels that are about 80,000 words, so I guess maybe it is a little bit long. But they actually, one thing I'm glad they did is that the type is it's just the tiniest bit larger and more generously spaced. So it's just a little easier on the eyes, and that's
right.
One reason it's 400 pages, which I totally appreciate.
I'm getting to the point where I appreciate that very much.
Yeah. I know.
You hit that magical 40, and it just was, boy. So this is based on a historical event, and I'm just kind of curious, like, how did you pick? There's so many events you could have based, a novel on. How did you end up picking this event? What was it, 1914?
Right. Well, it chose me. I mean, I wasn't. It's not like I sat down and said, "Oh, I'm going to go digging around for a subject." I was researching The Drunken Botanist, and I was writing about a gin smuggler named Henry Kaufman. And I just wanted to see what else Henry Kaufman had done. I wanted to make sure he wasn't also like a senator or, someone famous, and maybe there's more to this story. So I was just doing that tiny little bit of due diligence that I do a lot of times with research. And I went into the New York Times archives, and I found this article about someone named Henry Kaufman. I never did find out if it was the same guy, but it was an article about this guy named Henry Kaufman who owned a silk factory in Paterson, New Jersey, and basically ran his car into a horse and buggy being driven by these 3 sisters. And they got into a big conflict over the payment for the damages, and it escalated until pretty soon they're having shots fired at their house and bricks thrown through windows and arson attempts, and they were basically under siege for a year. But they fought back in this really interesting way. And so I just read this one article in the New York Times, and I was like, wow, this is an amazing story. And then I dug a little more, and I found out more about these sisters, and, you know, fast forward 6 months, and I knew pretty much everything that ever happened to them in their lives. So I decided I really wanted to tell the story, and that it made a lot more sense to tell it as fiction instead of nonfiction. So the story really kind of happened to me. I mean, I felt like anyone could have found this story, but I'm the one who found it. And so I, in a way, felt obligated to tell it, like they had been totally forgotten about. But I found them. So it's been great. And it's going to be a series, and the series continues to be based on real events in their lives. Like, I know what happened to them over the course of many years, and it's all pretty interesting. So that's the second book that you see right there on the floor. It'll be out next September. It's, as you can see, still in progress.
I was going to ask what you're working on next. Well, there we go.
There it is. Yes, and the third one, if you want to just know what these look like in stages, I'm gonna move the camera. So.
Okay. You have a system. It looks like.
That's what the second one looks like. It's all written and it's being revised. And that's what the third one looks like.
Jeez, wow.
It's index cards and Post-it notes at this point.
That's great.
Yeah. So anyway, that's where I'm at.
That's great. Did you just get another idea while you're writing one and then just start jotting things down and research along the way?
Well, because it's based on what really happened in their lives, I don't have to get ideas. I mean, over the course of, like, I would say 6 months or a year, I was able to, these women had a remarkable run. Like, this car accident kicked off an amazing era in their lives in which they did all kinds of remarkable things. I mean, it's not a secret. I'm not giving any spoilers away to say that Constance, the oldest sister, went on to become one of the first women deputy sheriffs in America. So she had this very interesting career in law enforcement. And the other sisters also did some very interesting things having to do with crime fighting and law enforcement as well, which is coming in future books. And so yeah, basically what I'm doing is I'm taking what really happened to them, and I'm breaking it up into chunks that make sense as individual stories, and I'm just telling kind of one part of their life at a time over the course of several books. If my publisher will let me get away with that, we'll see. I have a deal for the first 3, so I'm good that far. And then and hopefully they'll still be having a good time, and I will, and I'll get to finish telling the story.
That's fantastic. When you were researching this, did you do a lot of interviewing? Are there relatives that are alive that are interested in the books and the story that's being told about their maybe grandmothers or?
Yeah. Yes, they are still around. These 3 sisters had a brother, and their brother got married and had kids. So I have talked to the grandson of their brother. And so he never knew the 3 sisters, but he heard stories. So he had some stories to share and some photographs and a few other bits of kind of memorabilia. And then I was able to share a lot with him because I put his family tree together in Ancestry.com. I got census records and birth certificates and things like that. So I assembled a lot of that that he didn't have. And then the youngest sister, she was kind of younger by a long shot, and she also had children later in life. So it just works out that her son is still alive. He's in his 80s, and he lives on the East Coast. So I actually got to go talk to him, and he knew 2 of the 3 sisters, his mother and his aunt. So that was the most amazing thing, was getting to talk to somebody who actually knew them and had personal memories about them. It's been very exciting.
It's very exciting.
Yeah.
Are you allowed to give away like what part of the country did most of this take place in?
Oh yeah, it's Paterson, New Jersey. Paterson and
Oh,
Hackensack.
wow.
Yeah, I know. Totally inconvenient for me living in California. Like, why couldn't I have picked something closer to home? I gotta, I get on the plane and I fly out there and I have to look at microfilm all day because, a lot of stuff isn't on the internet. So I have to sit in the basement of libraries and go through microfilm day after day after day. And it's exhausting, but, it's if it was here at home, I could go for an hour and then I could come home. But because I've flown myself out there and put myself in a hotel, it's like I need to get there when the library opens and stay all day and get this work done. So I've been there a lot doing research.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
this has just been so much fun hearing about your books and your story. I can't wait to get some of your books and start reading them. So I'm
Cool. Well,
super thrilled you could join us.
I wanted to say, in terms of cocktail gardening, which is what we were really going to get into, that I have a website called drunkenbotanist.com, which is all of the gardening stuff that wouldn't fit in the book. So you can search by plant and get recipe ideas and varieties and stuff like that. But you can also search by a spirit. So you could search by tequila or gin, and you would get what plants go with that. So that is a good kind of extra resource for the gardening part of, well, the cocktail part and the gardening part of cocktail gardening, really.
Very good. And I assume there's a lot of recipes in that too. I mean, you get the spirit from the plant, and we can
right. Yeah, there's about 60 recipes in the book, but there's a lot more on the website. So yeah, drunkenbotanist.com has pretty much a recipe for any plant you might be growing that can have a drink made out of it.
Very good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to check that out. So much to look at now.
Yeah, please do.
Absolutely. Oh, Brenda, do you have any questions or thoughts?
Yeah, I was just curious. I know you're really busy, but what is the best place our viewers can find you on the web?
Well, so my website is amystewart.com, so that's easy, and you can get tour dates and other stuff there. And I'm on Twitter and Facebook regularly, and a little less regularly on Instagram and Pinterest, but you'll find me there occasionally. So, and Goodreads. So if you're really in it for the reading and the books. And if you go to amystewart.com, you'll see all those social media links at the top of the page.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a delight getting to talk with you.
Thank you. This was fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap with that.